Italian, beautiful bike. People just think it's sexy. The noise, the emotion. The atmosphere in Ducati is basically why everybody wants to ride a Ducati.
You mostly use your heart and your hands. I spend a lot of time riding the motorcycle and having fun. It's really a very emotional type of job.
There has to be something vaguely irrational about your relationship with the bike.
The Ducati design philosophy, I think, is all about passion. It's about the visual elements of the bike, that every part of the bike has to look as good as it performs.
The reduce to the max means reduce everything is not necessary and everything is there, have to be the maximum level.
There are different ways about how you create a new bike. I'm always fighting with the engineers, frankly, on that one. Because the engineers think that the great bike comes from a process. I think that the great bike comes from magic.
This is the story of that magic and the passion of Ducati. It is a story of men and machines, of passion and pride, of success and setbacks. A story about the past, present and future of one of the most unique and desirable motorcycle marques in the world. We've been to Italy to interview the key figures at the factory. We've amassed an amazing amount of material, and we've resurrected rare vintage film and images. Hello, I'm Alain de Cadnet at Pro Italia Motorcycles in Los Angeles, and this is the story about the universal passion of the motorcycles you see here. This is the story of Ducati.
People feel like if they buy a Ducati, well, they actually do. They become part of a family, you could say.
The fun of motorcycling is the trip itself, is not the destination. If you go on top of the machine, first of all, you're not alone. You're with our history, with the riders that rode the machine. Their soul is in the machine because the machine has been developed, taking their suggestion, taking the technological breakthrough. The injection came from racing, traction control came from racing, the brakes are developed in racing, and the machine is quite different from anybody else. We have some characteristics that belong to us and to nobody else.
The Borgo Panigale region of northern Italy and the city of Bologna are the birthplace and home of Ducati motorcycles.
One of the things that you will not find in a paper that can explain you what are the rules that you have to follow in Ducati, you must be absolutely mad. This is the priority of the people. You must be mad for motor. We live in Emilia-Romagna. This is the name of this region that is also nicknamed as the land of the engine.
Every little garage around Bologna, there is somebody trying to make his bike go faster.
Fast bikes lead naturally to racing. Claudio Domenicali heads up Ducati's legendary race program.
Racing is part of the heritage of the company. The company started back in the 50s with racing bikes. The racing has always been the backbone of our culture.
Ducati's Troy Bayliss is the world superbike champion. He dominated the 2006 season and his Ducati 999 was practically untouchable.
I'm part of the Ducati family, and just every time when I come back past here and see the bikes, sometimes I pinch myself because I don't believe actually where I've come.
Ducati Corsa, out of a relatively tiny operation in northern Italy, is famous for mixing it up on the racetrack. and beating the deep pockets and seemingly unlimited resources of the huge Japanese factories. Ducati has won more World Superbike Championships than any other manufacturer and has more single race victories than all the other competitors combined, not to mention their giant-killing status in MotoGP. At Ducati, they relish the reputation of being David to the Goliaths of the industry, both on the track and on the street.
We sell about 40,000 bikes a year. Honda sells 9 million bikes a year. 40,000, 9 million. Think about the different financial strength of the two companies. And yet, just a week ago, we were at Motegi in their home and we just won. And they sent me very frigid congratulation notes, all the Japanese manufacturers. They didn't like it. And I think, you cannot achieve that if you don't have the passion, if you don't have the territory around here.
Have you ever tasted the Italian kitchen in a restaurant in New York or somewhere else, and the taste of the Italian food in a little trattoria outside the center of the town? The taste is completely different. It's like our bikes. You could make something that is similar to a Ducati, but is not a Ducati.
If there is a Ducati on the road here, you hear it, but you don't see it, you recognize it's a Ducati. Harley is the same. Harley goes potato, 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 and you feel it. Ducati goes room, room, big, fat room. The Japanese, they have the same kind of wee, wee, wee type of very high pitch, and it could be one of the four. They don't have a personality, they don't need a voice. We have a character, we have a personality, we must have a voice. Our machine is born on the Futa Pass. The Futa Pass goes up the Apennines, the mountains up here that link Bologna to Florence. Our tester tests their bike up there. It's about 400 switchbacks in 40 miles of road. And not surprisingly, we have the best cornering bike. We have a bike that is light to go up there, a bike that belongs here. If you think about it, Harley-Davidson belong to Milwaukee. Both are bikes that have a soul because they belong somewhere. They are born on a territory. A Japanese bike is born in a Japanese factory. I mean, how much fun can it be of being born in a Japanese factory? They are great machines, but they don't have this soul. Our bikes have a voice.
The design chief at Ducati, the man behind the soul of the bike, is Pierre Terreblanche.
If you ask people what they like 3 years from now, because that's how long it takes to develop a bike, people don't know. Well, the magician understands that. We have one of those magicians, is Pierre Terreblanche, that can come out of his hat every now and then without being requested, without market research, without anything, comes a brilliant idea.
Terreblanche's latest brilliant idea? A whole new type of bike, the Hypermotard.
I think people don't realize how small it is till they actually see it or sit on it. It's actually smaller than a 660 Yamaha. Wheelbase-wise, the enduro bikes are normally about 1495 Supermotards. This is 1460, so we're that much shorter wheelbase-wise. Got decent tires, decent brakes. And unlike the motards, normally they sort of motocross bikes with wheels stuck on, but this is a road bike with different styling stuck on. So this is going to be, on the road it's much, much better than a motard. Got decent power, lots of torque, meant for normal people riding in normal situations, not on the racetrack, town, going to work, get in the mountains and embarrassing the superbike riders. If you're good enough, that's not me, but it's just meant to be as much fun as you can get on two wheels. And that's what everybody that's ridden the bike said about it. It's a lot of fun. Probably the most fun motorcycle we make.
Pierre is very passionate about what he does, and forget about criticizing him, but just commenting on what he does is very difficult. But that is fine. I think he has a very strong point of view. We love people that have very strong point of view.
Behind the mirrors, it looks cool and it works better. I mean, this is wider than your elbows, and for town riding, obviously, sometimes you'd want it narrow, but we have a situation where you can take this exact mirror and mount it higher up with a little bracket. If you live in town, you can change it if you want. If you want your bike to look ugly and be practical, you can put it here. If you want it to be really cool, put it on over here. It wasn't an obvious Ducati, but when they went to the show and the reaction was so strong, then the decision was made to produce it. My view has always been that the market's changing and the people, the clients are changing, so the products also have to change.
My average day, it doesn't exist. My days are very unpredictable. At the Ducati bar, I'll have a cappuccino, have a chat with workers that are coming in, and that's where I spend a good half an hour just listening to people. First of all, you have to have a vision. And my vision, having been in the US for many years, was, I think, derived from the great success of Harley Davidson. And basically, my idea was we can transform Ducati. I think that motorcycling is, above all, having fun with a technological object. We have created a real community of people that believe in the same thing, which is, motorcycling with a very special object, which is Ducati. Well, here we are in the community area. The job of the people that work here is to be in touch with the Ducati community all over the world, and and try to develop and help them develop any idea or any, as crazy as it might be, in order to kind of foster the fun of being a Ducatista and working with Ducati. We have here this is the club section, and ciao. And we have these are all the club presidents, quite a lot from the U.S. Valentina here is she handles the website, and she's also the singer of the Ducati band. So
No.
absolutely, we have. Come and show a picture of the Ducati band. Die. No, it's very nice. We have a band that comes out at the club events and stuff like that, and is made by, 5 elements? 4 are engineers from the technical department, and Valentina is the singer. So when they get enough beer, they're very good. If somebody brought a bike in here, this is going to be interesting. We have a lot of people that collect our parts, and we thought that it might be interesting to put them up for sale and then give the proceeds to charity. From current racing or from old racing, these are places that have been discarded because they were burned or whatever. This is a piston that I think was used. And rather than throwing it away, I thought we could put it to good use at selling it. Somebody would like to have it on his desk, and we can give the proceeds to charity.
In addition to all his official duties, Minoli writes a blog for the worldwide Ducati community.
Whenever I post something on the blog, I have about 200,000 people that read it, which is astonishing. When I ask people what would be their favorite rider for next year, I got 1,800 answers from people. So we publish the results, and the dialogue goes on. And am I going to listen and to do exactly what people want? Sometimes no, but sometimes yes. When we published about the Hypermotard, we're asking for comments, people wanted a double disc, and now we have a double disc. My day, ends up taking my bike and going back home. I have what we call the Zanarini test. Zanarini is a very trendy, cool bar here. A new bike, a new color, We park it there, and I sit and have an aperitif at the bar. And you see from the crowd that assembles around if it's a success or not a success, if it's cool or not cool. The fan will tell you what he likes and what he doesn't like. We are small, we are all the same family, we're all the same community.
But it's not just the culture and mystique that set Ducati apart. The engineering is different too.
99.9% of engines in the world are just using a spring to come back the valve. So the camshaft is opening the valve and the spring is closing. We have developed the desmodromic system, and now we have developed a very deep system in calculation and for experimental testing of this mechanism. That system is very useful because you can reach high RPM, you can reach very strong acceleration of the valve, and you could do that with very low losses in power. Another point is the layout of the engine. Of course, there are a lot of 2-cylinder and 4-cylinder in V configuration, but the Ducati one have the characteristics that we call L-shape. L-shape, it means that the V of the cylinder, the front one and the rear one, the front is quite horizontal. We know very well that system, and we have developed all the bike, I mean the street bike, the superbike, and even the GP, around that concept. So we are not designing the engine after we design the bike, but we design the bike and the engine together because the system should be fully integrated even with the rider. So you have to design the system, engine, frame, and rider all together to reach the best layout.
The simplest and most popular version of the Ducati philosophy is what the Italians simply call il mostro, the monster.
I think the monster, and they're the sort of quintessential motorcycle. There's a tank, an engine, and as little else on the bike, a saddle of some sort. And that's why people relate to them.
The monster defines, I think, a kind of urban, aggressive, street fighter type of motorcycle.
If you asked a 6-year-old child to draw a bike, they'll probably draw you one of those sort of. There's an engine there and a tank and a seat and a sort of round headlamp and 2 wheels. That's it. Okay, that's a bike. That's probably the closest you can get to the essential of having a motorcycle.
It's the one you're most likely to see. You go to New York City or Los Angeles or Topeka, Kansas. If you're going to see a Ducati, chances are it'll be a monster.
The monster was designed by Miguel Galuzzi way back. It was his vision of what he wanted for himself. And it wasn't such an intellectual thing, it was just a thing that came from the heart. And he did this bike because he really believed in it.
Several years after the Monster's debut, Ducati created a bike with the same engine and technology, but with a totally different style and appeal.
The whole thought of the Multistrada was to build a bike which was easy and fun to ride, to let everybody ride at 110% of their capacity, whether that's low or high or intermediate.
Pierre and I have a very, well, it's either a very good or a very bad relationship depending on the day. And Pierre had been bugging me, well, we have to build an all-rounder. And we came up with a code name which was called Project 85. And the idea was that the bike would outperform 85% of the competition in any kind of class. For a long time we had this battle. How much is it a sport bike? How much is it a tourer? What's the right balance?
To ride a sports bike fast on really twisty roads, you need to be an excellent rider. Especially now you have 120, 130, 150, 180 horsepower. So the idea was this bike should be the most fun and actually the quickest bike that somebody of normal levels can ride.
Every Ducati, regardless of model, shares the same unique Italian heritage.
I think probably the museum is the best part of the building.
Livio Lodi is company historian, the keeper of the Ducati flame.
He likes to say that he was conceived at Ducati because both his father and his mother were workers at Ducati. They were working at Ducati. They got married here, and he likes to say that he was conceived at Ducati.
The history of Ducati is quite amazing a story because it looked like a clock and dagger novel. You can tell that the company was created in 1926 by the Cavalieri Ducati brothers. There were three young boys, Adriano, Marcello and Bruno Cavalieri Ducati, that started the production of small electric condensers in a small workshop in the center of Bologna.
Ducati prospered until World War II turned Europe upside down. The Germans occupied northern Italy, turning Ducati into a munitions factory, making it a strategic target for Allied bombers.
October the 12th, 1944, the company was destroyed by a bombing raid. There were 75 B-24 Liberators that took off from the south of Italy. They dropped over 750 bombs in the factory and in the nearby of Borgo Panigale.
Livio is such a fanatic about Ducati history that he tracked down the actual US Air Force photographs of the bombing raid on the factory.
Now, that was a really dramatic time, but it looked quite ironical. If the Americans never dropped bomb over the factory, we will never have Capirossi on the Desmosedici, or the 999, or Hodgson on the 999, or Bayliss that win the Superbike championship.
To stay alive after the war, the Ducati factory had to reinvent itself and meet the needs of a new post-war Italy.
Ducati brothers chose to produce, under licensing, a small four-stroke engine that could be fitted on a frame of the bicycle. That was in 1946 when Ducati started to produce the Cucciolo, the puppy, a small dog. And the puppy was looking like a small toy that you can fit on the frame of a bicycle.
That puppy, that small toy, is the first two-wheel vehicle to ever wear the name Ducati.
That was the first thing that Ducati has made. Don't look at the wall bike, you have to take a look just at the engine and the tank, because that was the kit that Ducati sold to the customers in 1946. At that time, nobody had the money to buy cars or motorcycles. We are talking about 1946, just after World War II. So there were a lot of bicycles, and that was the way to change a bicycle in a look-like motorcycle. So you see, there is this four-stroke engine, 48cc, 1.5 horsepower. They used to have a gear with two speed that you could change by feet or by handle. And it was an engine that had a capacity of 100 kilometers with one single liter of gasoline. If you want to make the power of the Desmosedici with one Cucciolo, you have to put over 200 Cucciolo, one close to each other. In 1954, an earthquake happened in the company, earthquake in an ironical point of view. The genius was hired that made the difference for Ducati, Mr. Fabio Taglioni, Dr. T, the man that developed the Desmo, the V-twin, the Trellis frame, so we must be devoted for the genius of this man. This man developed the first concept of a racing bike, the first official racing bike. In the early years, Ducati participated to races, but this has been just an inspiration that the riders themselves made on common bikes. Taglioni developed the first bike, the 125 Grand Sport, so nicknamed as Marianna.
For the next 40 years, Dr. Taglioni's name would become synonymous with Ducati motorcycles.
In 1956, Taglioni developed for Ducati the first concept of a 125 Grand Prix Desmo. The bike was not developed for being a bike for races on the road, but for the first time races all around the world. That happened when Ducati became worldwide famous, when we took the first victory in 1956 at the Swedish Grand Prix of Imola. And that was the beginning of what could be called the revolutionary age of Ducati.
A revolution highlighted by an English rider on board a unique Ducati, one of 2,000 Ducatis, all bought by one man.
There's a history behind this bike I have nearby me. This is the very first bike that was made for Mike Aylwood in 1960. The bike was the 250 twin-cylinder Desmo that the father of Mike Aylwood, Stan, he came here and he asked for a special bike for his son. The management said, "You must be crazy. You cannot afford to sustain the expenses of a project like this." And to demonstrate that he was able to do this, Stan Aylwood bought 2,000 Ducati bikes and became the first Ducati dealer in UK.
Aylwood rode for many teams, but he had a special relationship with Ducati. In 1959, he became the youngest rider ever to win a Grand Prix, aged 19, on a Ducati 125 Desmo. And then, nearly 20 years later, he came out of retirement to pull off an astonishing win in the Isle of Man on a 900 Supersports in 1978.
In 1961, the company fell in a limbo for some reasons that we have still to develop, because my job is not being the museum curator, but also sort of Ducati archaeologist. The company decided to retire the racing department.
But the production bikes were still exceptional. Ducati became well known for its beautiful, nimble-handling Desmo singles throughout the 60s. And they weren't afraid to take on the competition. But in 1969, Honda turned the motorcycle world upside down with the first production superbike, the CB750. And it became obvious that the days of the single-cylinder bike were numbered. But Dr. T and Ducati had not been sitting idle, although their four-cylinder design was not destined for greatness.
Ducati was carrying on some different projects, like the first concept of a V-shape engine bikes, the Apollo. The Apollo was developed in 1963, but we didn't have the know-how to build a look-like Harley-Davidson bike.
Despite magazine reports at the time, this police bike concept never made it into production, but it opened the door to Ducati's future.
The Apollo is the link that explains how Ducati passed from singles to V-twin. If you take a look to the shape of the engine, it's a 90-degree engine, but it was a four-cylinder engine.
Ducati's US importer, Joe Berliner, asked the factory to build a bike he could sell to compete with Harley-Davidson.
Sort of look like Harley-Davidson bike, but we didn't have the power to produce this kind of bike, so we made only 2 exemplars. If you take a look to the engine, it's the V-twin 90-degree shape, but it was a 4-cylinder. So when Taglioni developed the first V-twin Ducati for the 500GP, he simply took the idea of the Apollo and he cut into the engine, using 2 heads instead of 4. We could tell, I think, with no mistakes at all, that this is the fossil of the first V-twin Ducati.
In 1972, Dr. T introduced the gorgeous new bevel drive 90-degree V-twin, the 750 GT. It might not beat the 4-cylinder bikes in a drag race, but almost overnight, it became the most desirable motorcycle on the planet. And the new production bike reignited Ducati's interest in racing.
The explosion happened in 1971 when Ducati returned to the races with the 500GP. that was a non-Desmo bike, but it was a concept that was good for developing the first hyper bikes of Ducati, the 750 GT. We needed to have a production like that because in Europe it started the invasion of the Japanese bike, like the 754, like the Kawasaki Mach 3. So it was necessary to develop a new strategy.
That strategy was to develop the new 750 V-twin for racing. In Imola, in 1972, Ducati unleashed the racing version of the new production bike.
It was the bike that allowed to Paul Smart and Bruno Spaggiari to conquer the first and the second place at the 200 miles of Imola in 1972. We beaten the scary monster of that age, Giacomo Agostini, with the MV Agusta.
The scary monster from MV Agusta was designed specifically for racing. Paul Smart's Ducati used the modified engine, frame, brakes and suspension from a standard production bike. In doing so, the 750 not only won, but set a precedent for years to come.
That was the real grandmother of the 916 of the 999 because for the first time we developed a racing bike from a production one. Originally the base was the 750 GT. We modified the heads with the Desmo system, so the bike became powerful.
In March 1977, Ducati showed its prowess at America's premier racetrack. The Japanese fours and factory-backed BMWs had been much fancied at the Daytona Superbike race. But a privateer motorcycle journalist named Cook Nelson dominated the race on his Ducati 750 SS, prepared by his friend and colleague Phil Schilling. Both the victory and the bike, Old Blue, remain legendary in Ducati racing history.
The 750 Supersport is still one of the most haunted bikes of Ducati because it was the very first Desmo V-twin of Ducati.
And the legendary triumvirate of Ducati production bikes of the 70s was complete. The 750 GT, Sport, and Supersport. Rarely has a bike lineup captured the imagination of a generation. And what more beautiful motorcycles to inspire a new generation of Ducatis.
I think that we are small and flexible enough that we can give a certain amount of money to Pierre, not too much, to develop his own ideas up to the stage of a mock-up. And every year or so, he comes up with this beautiful mock-up. And then we decide if we produce it or don't produce it. The Sport Classic came the same way. But I think that the magic was there. And why Pierre has the magic, I don't know.
The reincarnated versions are called the Sport Classics. The GT, the Sport 1000, and the Sport 1000S.
Ducati design philosophy, I think it's all about passion. It's about the visual elements of the bike, that every part of the bike has to look as good as it performs. The bikes, especially the Sport Classics, there was a lot of time spent on the detailing. The finishes, the material finishes, chrome, stainless steel, polished aluminium, castings, the various paint finishes, the graphics and so on. And that's a very important part. And of course, the thing that one almost needn't mention, the bikes always have to perform extremely well. Handling, performance, and because they're twins, they've always been very torquey, easy to ride, quickly. People expect, when they look at the bike, they expect it to be sort of slow, with bad handling, bad brakes, doesn't start. Of course, it's the opposite. It's a modern bike, as modern as everything we've got. And in fact, they're probably some of the best bikes we make now. because they're the latest ones we've done. The idea was that we do modern sport bikes, but recalling the past a little bit. The idea was just to make a bike which really was neoclassic. It was a classic bike recalling all the glorious bikes of the past, that's early 70s, but with modern componentry, with a modern motor, brakes, suspension, something totally up to date and with enough power for the average rider. Sport classic was actually extremely difficult to design, not from the aesthetic point of view, but from the packaging point of view. How do we fit a battery and a big airbox for enough power, all the electronics and fuel in a package that 20, 25 years ago they fitted no airbox. The battery was stuck on somewhere. It had fairly little fuel tank was half the size. So we've now reached a point where we have to radically rethink how the bike's constructed before we even think about the design.
The Sport Classics, like all Ducatis, are built in the factory in Bologna.
This is where all the bits come in, parts from Brembo, Marzocchi, Marcassini, etc., to build up motorcycle, along with the raw parts that are going to be machined for the engines, etc. We begin as an introduction to the factory with lots of pictures you see along the wall. The pictures represent an evolution of Ducati through time, including pictures of the original factory building, doing electronic pieces in the center of Bologna in the early 20s, through motorcycle manufacturing in its current location here in Bologna. Also, you'll see some of the early logo types on the motorcycles, which have evolved through time, and you'll notice some of today's Ducatis, we've gone back to some of the earliest logo types. Most of the hours of building a Ducati motorcycle in this factory are spent machining engine parts and assembling engines. The actual assembly of the final motorcycle is maybe 15% of it. Most of the hours are spent right here. You can probably smell the aluminum and the cutting oil. It's pretty exciting for us nuts and bolts type. Here's a raw casting of a 1000cc two-valve cylinder head as it comes into the factory. This is how we receive it. It hasn't had any machining yet, so again, it's a raw casting. When the cylinder head is finished, it'll weigh about 60% of what it weighs now.
Anybody that comes to our door has the right to come in and see the plant. And the workers are instructed that they have to talk to the people, because the workers are Ducatisti, the people that come here are Ducatisti. They have things to tell each other.
And here's a cylinder head at the end of the machining process, where the combustion chamber's been machined, valve seats have been installed, the guides have been installed. And again, this weighs about 60% of what it weighed when it came in. The methodology today is collecting all the parts to build all our motorcycle engines in this area. And then we have shopping carts, we call them. These are all the parts required, as it says here, to make a Monster 695 European model. From the cylinders to the cylinder heads to the engine cases to the electronics. It's one kit for one engine. This will be wheeled over to the production line, and that's where the assembly of the engine will start. You can see the cylinder head starting to be added to the engines, clutch covers, electronic side cases, oil filter, cam belts, etc. As we follow down the end of the line here, a completed engine will come off the line. This is that cold testing area, so we're running the engine in a way without fuel, but driving the engine with a machine. We're spinning the engine, things set in a little bit, and we'll do a final valve adjustment here before it goes to the final assembly in the motorcycle, and then final hot testing. There's the Ducati Corsa sign, lots of secret stuff going on in there. This little sign says this is the room for engine testing, and if we look inside here, it's pretty exciting just to sneak a peek in that window. Not only is it full of racing engines, but there's lots of experimental engines and production engines, one of each type, lined up along the walls. Beginning of the production line, this is where the engine and the frame come together for the first time. You maybe say the birth of the motorcycle in a way. As you can see, this is where the Trellis frame meets the L-twin engine here. There are less expensive ways to make frames. I think you see a lot of extruded aluminum frames today versus the Trellis frame of Ducati. It seems simple when you look at it, but the triangulation of that frame and where the engine is bolted to the frame are very complex, really. The Trellis frame looks rather sparse. In fact, it is, and one of the reasons it can be like that is because we're using the engine as a stressed member part of the frame. So the engine, the stout engine case, has become an active component of the Trellis frame of the Ducati. At the end of the day, it's the same frame construction we use on our MotoGP bikes and our World Champion Superbikes. It's a formula that we know how to make work and how to make a motorcycle get around a track quickly. One of our partners in business is Brembo. This arrives at the factory like this. It's a wheel, a tire mounted and balanced, pressurized, with the discs and the bearings installed. Here we are at the end of the production line, and we have a flock of Monster 695s here. Now, taking the bikes to the end of the production line, we're going to go into hot testing. And he's going to start up for the first time. He's going to run the bike on the dynamometer. So if we go over to the window to the side here, we can watch the process. This process takes about 5 minutes. It's not very lengthy, but there's lots of things happening at the same time. The bike is now plugged in. The information, the data is being recorded for this particular motorcycle. The individual components, the final motorcycle, are all linked together at the end, and that data is captured. You can hear him revving the engine now, and he's just sort of feeling and sensing the motorcycle now. Now he's running through the gears. Behind him gives you an indication of some of the data from the bike. After this, it's a matter of putting it on a pallet, shipping it up to a warehouse where we store the bikes and ship them to the next destination. That's a truck that's heading off to a company called Sima. Each assembled motorcycle goes on one of these temporary pallets and shipped up to Modena, right up the street here. And they come off the temporary pallets, they're put onto pallets that are shipped overland by truck to Europe. If they're going overseas, Asia, America, places like that, they get put into a wooden crate and then into a sea container on a boat and over to other shores.
Today, they're shipping a lot of bikes from the factory in Bologna, but that wasn't the case in the early 80s when Ducati, on the verge of bankruptcy, were under the control of the Italian government, and those were dark days for Ducati, until another Italian family stepped in.
So you can imagine how difficult was that time. But in 1985, the Castiglioni brothers came and they gave a new resurrection of Ducati. They started to believe in what Ducati has made as motorcycle all around the world. They developed first the 750 F1, that was the last project that Taglioni's made.
With the 750 F1, Fabio Taglioni set the stage for the next generation of bikes. The modern era of Ducati was born.
In 1988, it was the year that we developed the first superbike, the 851. 851 was called the superbike because it was the bike that started the beginning. The 851 was the bike that allowed the French rider Raymond Roche to win the first championship in 1990. Then Doug Polen, the American rider, won again in 1991 and 1992.
Ducati's continued development of the V-twin Sportbike led to the introduction of the most desirable bike since the original 750 SS, the 916. But it wasn't an unobtainable machine for a select few. The 916 was available for anyone who wanted one, and it put Ducati on the mainstream map.
Suddenly, in 1994, we released the 916, the bike that became an icon.
The 916, designed by Massimo Tamburini, captivated the world. It was the first Ducati many Americans ever saw. And in typical Ducati tradition, its beauty was backed up by victories on the track.
This icon that is remembered as the bike that changed the concept of the bike, not only a matter of bike developed for race, but also a bike that should have also good looking. It was also the bike that allowed the riders like Carl Fogarty to become the legend of Superbike, winning 4 championships. Troy Corser also won the championship in 1996 and Troy Bayliss in 2001.
Ducati has a tradition of displaying its championship-winning race bikes in its museum. Before winning the 2006 World Championship, there were already 3 of Troy Bayliss's bikes in the Ducati Museum. Now, there are 4.
Well, I've got 3 in here at the moment, I think.
After winning the British Superbike title on a Ducati in 1999, Troy moved to America to contest the AMA Superbike Championship and had a strong debut at Daytona. But when Ducati factory rider Carl Fogarty was injured, Bayliss got the call to take his place on Ducati's World Superbike team.
And I received a phone call from Paolo Ciabatti, and he asked me if I'd like to come and have a ride on Carl's bike because he was injured, and I jumped at the chance.
America's loss was World Superbike's gain.
Next year we won the World Championship, so I've got a couple of bikes in here now, and it's like I say, it's special, and now we're going to have another one. That's perfect. As far as the feeling on the motorcycle, there's been times, a lot of times actually on the Ducati, where I feel at one with the bike and we do work really well together. There's been times where I've actually felt like I've been watching me from above actually racing the bike. It sounds weird, I know, but sometimes it feels like I'm actually playing myself on the PlayStation and I feel indestructible. I feel like I've got an X amount of lives if something happens. Different things go through your mind, but mainly, you know, when you're really, like I'm saying, in form and you're at one with the bike, nothing really comes into mind. You're just concentrating on the race and just making everything right. But, you know, I'm a racer. I love the speed, I love the noise, and it just comes naturally for me. Some people see me on the bike and they think, wow, you were really out of shape out of that corner, and when I come back into the box, somebody might say something like this, and I think, I can't remember, because for me it was nothing, unless, you know, it was some big crazy moment. But honestly, whenever I ride the bike, 98% of the time I feel so much in control that nothing can go wrong.
Since 2003, Ducati Corsa hasn't limited itself to superbike racing.
Then we added a complication to our life and very big challenge, which is GP. GP is a prototype race. And the GP opened up a much more challenging and a much wider arena, if you want, where we can try more solutions. So we are now creating the fastest, quickest lapping prototype in motorcycling.
From the outset, Ducati's V4 Desmosedici was the most brutally fast bike in MotoGP and was immediately competitive against the much more experienced Japanese factory teams, an incredible accomplishment at this level of racing.
And immediately, as soon as we did that, we were the first one to think how we can put that on the street. And the Desmosedici RR was born, which is basically the closest thing to a racing bike that you can almost legally put on this, legally put on the street.
Make no mistake about it, Ducati Corsa has played a major role in bringing the next production superbike to life.
We have a clear mission to deliver to the customer a bike which is the most pure derivation of a race bike you can buy on the road without compromising.
For us, racing is not only marketing. The main point is to develop our knowledge and put our knowledge into the market in our product.
There are certain moments when the racing will tell you that there has been a technological quantum leap. You can adjust an existing bike to a certain level, but you cannot make a quantum leap without changing it drastically. For instance, if we take the 999, we think is a great bike. It did very well for us. At a certain point, though, there is only that much weight that you can reduce, and there is only that much power that you can increase.
Ducati's latest race-bred street bike is the 1098.
It will be the most powerful twin ever built in the history of motorcyclists, that for sure. It will be the most powerful and light twin available on the market. Our main motto is designed by the stopwatch, because it's exactly what we did, you know.
When you are in the track, there is one that is the real judge, that is the clock, no? So if you are putting some strange things just because you want to be different from the others, but the solution is not so good, the clock will tell you that is a mistake.
We did it with a quantum leap. You have a new engine, you have to redesign the entire bike, you might as well redo the design because the designer has something better in mind, and that's what we did.
I could walk you around the motorcycle and show you a large amount of specification that is directly derived from our race program. Not only our World Superbike race program, our MotoGP race program, because MotoGP for us represents the ethereal, the absolute cutting edge.
It's much different than reading on a piece of paper, you know? So this is the reason why I really try to spend as much time I can directly myself on the bike. When we developed the new Superbike, to take it at the limit of the bike, you need a professional racer, and I'm very far from his lap time, even if I'm not completely slow, you know?
From the outset of the project with the 1098, we looked not only at design, specification and performance, although those things were very important. My feeling, the hand I was holding up in the product development meetings was, we have to be competitive. We are a tiny player in the sport bike market. Well, we shouldn't be. We're a sport bike manufacturer. My feeling is we're the best sport bike manufacturer. The hardcore Ducatisti, who may be feeling a little threatened at the moment, I can reassure them that it will never go mass market. When I talk about selling 3,000 or 4,000 of these, let's put it into some perspective. There will be 1.1 million motorcycles sold in the US this year. The GSX-R 1000 is really the role model for the mass market bikes. They'll sell 25,000 of them this year, new in the US. If I sell 3,500 across 3 different models, it'll still be exclusive.
I think this place is special, and the thing we produced and we made here are special just because there are people that have the will to do. We have such a strong will to do. We never feel defeat or abandoned by bad luck, you know what I mean. Like Ducati in the past, it was not easy, but we survived. We survived the German invasion, we survived to the bombs, we survived to the Italian government. I think we are strong enough to survive also this moment because we have passion.
Ducati and Ferrari and Maserati and Lamborghini, it's not a random thing that all of these companies are in this particular part of the world. There's a tremendous culture for craftsmanship, for handmade things, for things that last, for things that endure.
You know, I think that Ducati is definitely a true motorcycle for true motorcycle enthusiasts. It's a bike built by motorcycle enthusiasts for motorcycle enthusiasts.
These guys are just extremely passionate. They're normally interested in design, and they're really interested in what goes on inside the motor. They follow the Grand Prix, they follow the racing. They're just true enthusiasts.
It's the cycle parts that really get me going. That's what I'm a geek about. The motor's great, but it's 160 horsepower. If I ever get to exploit more than 100 of those on the street, I'll be doing well. It's a track day motor. Yeah, it's a bragging motor, and it's glorious.
I think the racing has to do with the mentality of the people here. They just love to be fast, they love risk, they love challenge.
You have to touch this feeling. It's very difficult to understand. I think that the reason why we are so famous and people love so much the bike we made, we are talking about psychology now. I think because mostly of the motorcycle riders suffer of the Peter Pan disease. Even if they are 50 or 60 years old, they want to ride their own Ducati, faster like the light speed, because this bike is the only one that gives you that strange thrill. When you stop the engine and park your bike, say, whoo, that's what I call speed.
Men and machines, passion and pride, success and setbacks. And every now and then, a twist of fate. But when all is said and done, it's the motorcycles that are the story. From the simplicity of the early singles to today's sophisticated race-bred machines that keep the passion alive. I'm Alain de Cadnet at Pro Italia Motorcycles in Los Angeles. Thank you for sharing our ongoing passion for Ducati.